Yay.
Whenever you're ready, Jen.
Yay, okay. So we remember from a few weeks ago about the wiggly letters, and we were just talking about the wiggly letters, but I'm going to summarize wiggly letters for those who are watching us on video later. So strange letters in Torah scrolls and tefillin and mezuzahs. And a lot of what we know about the strange letters comes from this mysterious book called Sefer Tagei, or sometimes known as Sefer Tagin. And Sefer Tagin comes to us from the Gaonic era, probably, from Bavel, from the yeshivot of, we don't know exactly which yeshiva, but there are several yeshivas in this part of Bavel. And they are the intellectual center of Jewish life. They are gently patronizing about the yeshivot which exist in the Holy Land. Bavel is where it's at. If we go back a couple hundred years to the 5th or 6th centuries, what's going on? There's the academies in Bavel still happening in 5th, 6th, 7th centuries. They've basically finished putting the Talmud together. They know what's in the Talmud, but they're putting together the final editorial layers. The Talmud is almost certainly entirely oral at this point. They aren't writing down the Talmud. And the Babylonian community is in contact with the Palestinian community to some degree. And both communities are in contact with the rest of the Jewish world, which is in Byzantium and North Africa and starting to extend up into Europe. So both the Palestinian Jewish community and the Babylonian Jewish community are working on their Talmuds. And they're also working on the Bible. So the text of the Bible is set by now, and the consonants are all in place. What's not in place yet quite is how you speak it, or the systems to record it. So when we've got the Masoretes who are sitting around perfecting the text of the Bible, we've established that theologically, the Bible, the Torah was, at any rate, the Torah was given by God, every single consonant perfectly in place. And we also admit that we don't quite remember how the Torah should go. There are some places where the spellings aren't exactly right. You know, about chaser and yeter spellings. Like, if you write Chanukat and Mizbeach in Israeli Hebrew, you probably have a vav in Chanukat. But if you're writing in biblical Hebrew, you don't have a vav because you don't need a vav because it's biblical Hebrew. So optional vavs and optional yuds pop in and out of the text because we haven't quite nailed all of that down yet. The Babylonian Talmud already admits we're not experts in the chaser and yeter spellings. So scribes are just copying manuscripts as best they can, taking a baked-in kind of best of 3 approach when you're not quite sure about how to spell something. But people are doing their best. And the Masoretes are also recording how people speak the Torah, how people sing the Torah. And various scholastic centers are developing different systems of writing down how to do that. So this here is the one that most of us know, with vowels and things that we recognize. There's 2 other systems. There's the Babylonian one, which is similar-ish, little marks made around letters. There's a Palestinian one, again, little marks made around letters, but they're all slightly different systems. And you can go and read up on them in Wikipedia because the articles there are actually pretty good. But what we've got is a bunch of scholars who are focused on the biblical text and noting down really tiny details like whether you say something ah or ah. Really, really, really small details. We don't have any Torah scrolls surviving from this period, the Masoretic and Gaonic periods. We've got some fragments, and we talked about some of those last week. And we can see that they have oddly spiky text. No vowels, obviously, because the vowels are only being recorded in books, not in scrolls. And the other thing that we don't have on any of the early Torah scrolls is any kind of tagin or modified letters or wiggles or anything weird. So whoever was doing the wiggles, it's quite niche. And the Masoretes are really concentrating on the Bible so hard and so much that when they've finished thinking about all the vowels and all the music systems, they start counting things. So the Tiberian Masoretes over in the Holy Land, they start counting all the occurrences of an individual word. And I'm focusing here on Masoretes because this is setting us up for Tagin later. So you only have to get this mindset of we really, really, really care about how many times the word, for instance, ulzvulun occurs. So this is a page of the Aleppo Codex, which is a famous 10th century manuscript. It's a very, very accurate version of the Bible that was done by people who really, really cared about all the tiny details. It's the one that Rambam famously consulted when he wanted to know where the parsha breaks should be. So this is fairly good as they go. This blow up is pathetically bad, sorry about that, but their site wasn't working, so what are you going to do? But what you can see is some of these Masoretic notes in the margin. So here's a little lamed here in the margin, and that means that there's only one of this word. That's this one. It's marked with a little circle above the word that you would see if this picture was better. So there's only one time in the whole of Tanakh that this particular word occurs. Then this word here, samach, is highlighted. And that tells us that there's a little bet over here that that particular combination of letters and vowels only occurs twice in the entire Tanakh. And then up here, this list in the margin, in the top margin, is a list of the 2 times that that particular combination appears. And that's part of a whole long list of things like individual words that appear only once, words that appear only twice, words that appear once with a lamed before and once with a bet before. Things like ochla and ve'achla, combinations that happen with a vav one time and no vav another time. Yeah. So you have all this counting going on in Tiberias, and grammar, they're very interested in that. But in Bavel, we have some other stuff going on. And we know about the stuff from Bavel, mostly from the Cairo Geniza. So there's Bavel that's all the way over here. There's the Holy Land down here. And then over here, there's North Africa, obviously. And here's a diagram of where shipping and information is going. So we have stuff coming from the yeshivot in Bavel, stuff coming from various places in the Holy Land. It all comes around here, which is why there are so many copies of things in the Cairo Geniza. Stuff arrives in Cairo, they copy it, and then send it on to the diaspora and leave copies of it hanging around in Cairo. So when we found the Cairo Geniza, we had masses and masses of information about trade and about everything. And also helpfully about matters of rabbinic concern. So here's something that's a fragment from the Cairo Geniza. This is a different kind of Masoretic list. Physically what it is it's one bifolio from a choir. So over here is a diagram of how a choir is made. You probably know this, but folded sheets interlaid with each other. So this fragment here is just the outside of a notebook, basically. It used to be stitched onto another notebook to make a volume. And It's in a roughly 11th century script. It's probably an Egyptian hand. Now we're going to zoom in on it a bit. And today we're going to do some reading. So this is a piece of the book Sefer Tagei. It's one of the earliest surviving fragments we have. And it's completely incomprehensible, look. What can we see? Anybody fancy doing some reading? That first bit is an Aleph Lamed ligature, just FYI. So we've got that's an Elohim, Daled, Yud Hey Yud, Elohim de Yehi Me'orot, the Elohim of Yehi Me'orot, and then a period. That little guy there is punctuation. Here's another Elohim of, the D is being a sh because it's Aramaic, of Yishritzu. Elohim de Tutsi.
So it's listing the various commands from Bereshit.
Right, it's listing lumps of Bereshit.
It's listing the like utterances, the times of Vayomer Elohim, the 10 utterances of the first chapter of Genesis. I mean, if it keeps going in this way.
It keeps on going. So Elohim de Vaychal, Elohim de Vayvarech, and all of these Elohim, see the Mem Sofit has a little dot above it. So, okay. So the poor Cairo-Guinese researchers, when they first found this, they just wrote it down as Masora something and left it at that. Because you have to know what you're looking at before you recognize it. So you plug through this whole list of things with Mem Sofits highlighted. Down at the bottom of the page, it starts to get a bit useful. There's this guy. There's a nun with a curly foot and 3 tugging on his head. And it says, Navo. It says, Naase Adam Batsam Menu Kidmutenu, with again some of the nuns with little dots on. And so we've got alphabetical list of certain letters highlighted each time. And when we look at some early Torahs, it matches up. So here we are with Vayomer Elohim Totzi Haaretz. And oh look, the Mem Sofit is annotated. This is the passage with Naaseh Adam Batsam Menu Kidmutenu, and the nuns have feet. So this Torah is in conversation with the previous fragment because it's Mem Sofit in Elohim, it's nuns with feet, and also some other ones. This fragment didn't contain the list for Hey, but it probably also listed Elohim of Tutsi and so on. Here's another Torah. This is the Bologna Torah, which is the earliest known complete Sefer Torah. It dates from the late 12th century or early 13th century. It's the same passage, and here again, Vayomer Elohim, and the Hey of Elohim, and the Mem Sofit of Elohim, annotated. Naaseh Adam Batsam Menu Kidmutenu, the nuns here have the feet. They don't both have the same things. Like Naaseh is not annotated here, but it is up here. So people don't transmit quite the same things every time, but they're clearly working on something that looks conceptually, that's a lot like this list. That they probably don't have this actual list in front of them, but they've got a Torah that was once very similar to the Torah this list was made from. So here we have medievals doing letters, just like in the list from the Geniza fragment. And then when this gets really exciting is we look at the other side of the fragment. So I said it was pages from a notebook. So we were just looking at one of the back pages of the notebook, or the middle pages. We jumped down to the front page of the notebook. And this one's slightly easier to read. So it starts, Elu, Abaskiot, Petuchot, Vestumot, Vesidurot, Sheba Torah. So these are the breaks in the Torah, the open breaks and the closed breaks and the Sidura breaks. These are a mysterious kind of break that we haven't really got time to get into now because it's complicated. So it's going to give us a list of the paragraph breaks. Okay, thank you, book. Breshit. All right, good, yes. We'll start with Breshit. Yehirakia. Yikavu, a bit hard to read there. Yehimerot. Yishritsu. Totsi. Vaichulu. Elitodot. Hashem, abbreviated. So again, you have to know what it's describing because you don't put a paragraph like after Yehirakia. You put a paragraph before Yehirakia and before the bit that starts, well, go back up here, like the bit that starts Vayomer Elohim Tutsi Ares, there's a paragraph break before that. So here in the list where it says, Tutsi, then it means there's a paragraph break in that vicinity somewhere. So this is how people are communicating the paragraph breaks. You already have to know what you're looking at before you can understand it. But so somebody's made this Masoretic list. They've looked at a Torah scroll and they've taken very careful note of everything that's in it. They've written down every single time you get an exciting Mem Sofit. They've written down every single time you get an exciting Nun Sofit. They've written down all the paragraph breaks. They've written of every type. And they've made this great big long Masoretic list. So whether Tiberian Masoretes were making grammatical and spelling and vowel kinds of lists, these particular Babylonians were making lists about layout. So that's really helpful. So they've made a long list of all the Mem Sofits with annotations in whatever Torah they're looking at in some yeshiva in Bavel somewhere. And they've made a list of the Parshiot. And they've made probably other things, probably lists of large and small letters. And they've put it all together into a book. So now there's a book, and this Geniza fragment is a piece of that book remaining. So there's a book that has the Parshiot and probably the big and the small letters and all the modified letters and probably a list of words with dots on and other things that we don't know about anymore. But they've written down all the layouty things in this long Masoretic list. And then I decided to go and check out whether this list of Parsha breaks resembles the Parsha breaks that we have in Torahs today. And surprise, surprise, it doesn't. So here's a Torah that does match the list from the Geniza fragment. There's a paragraph break before Veha Adam Yada. There's a paragraph break before Vahimeketz Yamim. This is just a parsha, pasuk break at the end of a pasuk. So just so the reader knows how to stop, that's rather a big one. Here's a smaller one, here's another one. And there's a big, nice paragraph break here before Vayomer Kain El Hevel. All right, but only one of those is in a Torah today. A Torah today has a break before Veha Adam Yada. It does not have one before Vahimeketz. It does not have one before Vayomer Kain El Hevel. So the Torahs that were being used for the generation of the Masoretic list, which is Sefer Tagei, had different paragraphs, which is really exciting. And those paragraphs from Babel stayed with us right through into medieval Ashkenaz. This here is a Torah from about 13th century Germany. And here we've got people still using these Babylonian Parshiot. That didn't last because Rambam was very, very, very respected. And he went and got his Parshas from the Tiberian tradition, and everybody did those, which is what we do today. And the Tiberian tradition did not have those extra ones. And neither did the Tiberians care particularly about extra tagging and funny shaped letters. They were much more interested in grammar. But the Babylonian tradition held on to those. Now, Babylonian tradition tells us about tagging and layout, and the Tiberian one is the one that basically wins. Everybody's interested in that one, and they copy the lists over and over and over. And not very many people copy poor Sefer Tagei at all, but some people do. And it stays around just long enough that it gets copied into Ashkenazi Torahs and Sephardi Torahs and a few other Torahs here and there. The Parsha breaks don't survive. So there was this book called Sefer Tagei that was a Babylonian Masoretic list that cared about layout. It was presumably generated at some point. Somebody who cared about making lists went into the Aron Kodesh in the yeshiva in Bavel, and they copied down all the things, and then they alphabetized the list and passed it on to their students. And then they sent that, for whatever reason, they sent it via Cairo into the diaspora. And it had in it all of these things, the Parsha list, the Parsha breaks, and the big and small letters, and the tagging. But Rambam's list of Parsha breaks became authoritative, so you didn't need that part of the notebook. So why bother copying something you're not going to need? So people started copying only the bit about tagging. And you find that in just a few manuscripts here and there, that people have copied out this list of tagging and funny letters and weird things. And then it gets basically forgotten about, except among scribes and nerds. So there's this list that's being copied by scholars, but scribes are off in their own little world. Scribes are off when they're copying a Torah, and they're copying the funny letters, some of them. Some of them aren't, some of them don't bother, but a fair number of them do. And they don't care what people are writing in Masoretic documents and in halachic tomes. They're copying manuscripts. That's what they do. So they copy the special letters and they modify them and they adapt them. And some of them get way creative. Because the thing is now that by this time, we don't know why those letters were there. So here's all the letters. And we have them in the manuscripts, we have them in the list, but we don't know what the heck they're doing there. We can guess. And some scholars have pretty good tries, but basically they're anybody's guess now. So some medieval commentators link some of them into Midrashim, but I think that's because they're looking at the Torah, seeing a weird letter saying, what does this mean? And then they go hunting in the Midrash and they find something that means something. So they say, this one must mean that Paro was very busy doing things, very, very self-aggrandizing or whatever it might be. But basically all of these letters are completely up for interpretation by the Middle Ages because we've completely lost the tradition. And this is one of the things that makes them really kind of exciting, because when you're copying them as a scribe, you can attach your own meaning to them. And people in Ashkenaz were doing that. There are some Torahs from medieval Ashkenaz that have tons of these, way more than are in the list of Sefer Tagei. And I think that's because the scribes were there they are with the scroll, copying away, and you get to an interesting bit and you think, oh, I know something interesting about this. But obviously you can't make a marginal note in a Torah scroll because that's not how Torah scrolls work. So instead you stick in an embellished letter to remind you next time that there was something interesting about this one. And if you have any sense, you write that down in a notebook as well, but we don't have very many such notebooks surviving, only one. And it's really hard to read, and I haven't read most of it. But he does have quite a lot of creative drashot attached to the modified letters in the Torah that he was presumably looking at. But so if you want to produce an accurate Babylonian representation Torah, you can. You could do it with Babylonian Parsha breaks, and then everybody would be very confused and it wouldn't be very kosher. You could do it just with the modified letters. That would be better. But you also kind of have the option to get a bit creative. And if there are midrashim that, of the modern variety that are particularly meaningful to people now, you have the option of sticking in modified letters as a reminder for those. Because scribes in Ashkenaz used to do that, and no reason you shouldn't too, which might get a bit exciting. And you can also see that this is Sefer Tagei describing the letters here. So Aleph, Dit la Shiva Tagei. Aleph that has 7 tagin. Okay, very nice. But sometimes we see also Aleph that has 5 tagin or 9 tagin. So this is not a definitive list. This is a descriptive list of one way of doing it, and there are other ways of doing it. So there was a live tradition happening alongside. And here we've got Bet, the Atalta Tagi. Bet that has 2 tagin. 3 tagin, sorry. I know, I make numbers. He's got his 2 tagin stuck up there and one sticking out at the front, going downwards. And he does that a fair bit. He does that with Dalid Lila Abra Tagi. 3 on top, 1 sticking out of the front. This is terribly impractical because if you stick a tag out of the front of Dalid like that, it's going to whack into the next letter. But you do see people doing it, which is fun. Gimel with 4 crazy tagging. Hey that has 4 tagging, and it says Velodavkin, that you don't connect the leg. Then there's another kind of modified hey that it records. A hey that has 1 horn, and the leg is connected. And we saw last week that sometimes the legs of hay are connected to the roof. So this is one where the modification is recorded, that there are these instances where apparently you're supposed to connect the leg to the roof of hay. And that runs you smack into problems with halacha, of course. So probably if you're modifying letters, I wouldn't take this part of the tradition to its extreme and connect hay, because my Ashkenazi trained soul rebels against that, although we did see last week the Yemenite scribe who connects his kuf. I can't go that far myself personally, again, but here it is in a tradition of otherwise quite reasonable letters connecting the leg of hay. Then we've got Vav with a curly foot and a bendy head. We've got Zion with just 1 horn. We've got Zion with a curly bit on his side. We've got a Chet with 3 tagging and a Chet with bendy legs, with his legs splayed out to the sides. And the ways different scribes splay the legs out to the side is really quite pretty, some of them. Some of the Chets look positively balletic. It's lovely. We've got
Jen?
Tet with, yeah. Who was that? Now they've gone muted again.
Sorry, I just wanted to ask, where does this particular chart come from? It
Oh,
was
so this
going-
particular chart is from a guy called Shem Tov Ibn Ga'an. He was Spanish around the turn of the 14th century, so around 1300 something. And then he made Aliyah because he was a romantic. So he went and lived in Israel. So this manuscript he produced in Israel in about sometime after 1310. And he was very interested in the modified letters because he was extremely romantic and mystical and liked Kabbalah and liked mysteries. So he was big into these basically because they were mysterious. And he made a whole list of them with red ink and everything. And he forgot to put Nun Sofit in his list. And anybody who does, if you've ever done an Aleph Bet poster or something, it's so easy to leave letters out. And I feel for him terribly. Forgetting Nun Sofit, poor guy. So this is from a manuscript in the Library of Paris in the National Library. And I haven't read all of it yet because most of it's in this hideous Sephardic semi-cursive. But he does have nice diagrams. So I brought the diagrams just because, yay. So this is just the way that this particular Sephardi raised guy was doing it. He's also really interesting because he has a brother who's a big scribe. His brother writes biblical codices. He writes out Pentateuchs and things for his profession. So there are several manuscripts that his brother wrote. And his brother doesn't care about these letters at all. So his brother just puts the occasional one of these in his writing, but is not particular about it like Shem Tov is. So Shem Tov wrote a Bible for himself, for his own use. And he found a list of Sefer Tagei, and he went all the way through Sefer Tagei and put all of the modified letters into his Bible, and he was very proud of himself for doing that. His Bible is now in a private collection. You can't see it, much to my frustration, but there it is. It does still exist. And yeah, and so, but in a separate manuscript, he made these nice diagrams for us, which is terribly helpful. But yeah, when you look at all the other manuscripts, particularly in Ashkenaz, they're much more wild than these. And I still don't know what all of them mean. But if people want to start writing those in their Torahs, then do. There's a published version of Sefer Tagei that's arranged for the convenience of scribes, which is nice. And there's also so much potential for creativity. So the next Torah I write, I don't know what I'm going to do with the modified letters, but I sure know I'm going to do something. And yeah, aren't they gorgeous? Are there any other particularly really good bits that I need to share about the tagging of Sefer Tagei? He has three sorts of ayin, which is fun. He has ayin with its right side head bent over, ayin with its left hand's head doing high five to Shemayim, and ayin with a curly toe. And Sadi doesn't have nearly that range of creativity. So something about ayin really made those Babylonians excited. There is a boring theory that perhaps is just natural variation in the script that somebody copied down because they didn't know any different, but that's much less romantic. I like thinking of them as markers. I'm going to stop the recording. Or can Ariella stop the recording?